Well, it's a novel, and I would say it's a novel about, in the most general terms, about brilliant people with a lot of talents who cooperated with these horrendous regimes. And this book deals with many multiply reasons for their cooperations and for their characters and for their actions. And this is not exactly a very reflecting novel. It's more like an action-driven novel in the sense that this novel describes action by human beings and their consequences. And so this is the most superficial definition of the novel.
And are we talking about cooperation or collaboration?
I think collaboration. Cooperation, I don't think there's much difference in the book because I think that the main thing is to understand the portrait of those people and to understand the way that they make this deal with the regime. The regime gives them an opportunity to social mobility, and they give the regime their talents and their aspirations, and the regime gives them an opportunity to excel. And this is something that I wanted to emphasize in the novel, because people always talk about people that were being afraid, washed by propaganda, all the Eichmanns. I don't think it's the interesting story of the Second World War. And this is like the bureaucratic explanation is, I think, a superficial explanation to the cooperation of so many people with those regimes. And by the way, I don't read this book as a book about just about the Second World War, because I think this is a reduction. And there are some people who like reductions, but not me. I think that the Second World War is only a laboratory to think about the human consciousness.
Okay, so actually it's not a historical novel.
It's located in historical time.
Yeah, but just just before the beginning of World War II.
But I mean, I think that a historical novel is a very interesting creature in literature, because if it's a good novel, it plays in two different fronts. One is the historical period, like the Second World War, but it also has to be relevant and talk the language of the current time. And I think that in a way, think about Thomas Heiselberg. I wouldn't write...
He's the
German,
one of the main characters.
I wouldn't write this character, more than he is a Nazi. He believes in capitalist ideas that he learned from his American company, right? So the decision to build this character in the way I build it were influenced by what happened since the Second World War and until now. Because if, for example, capitalism would have vanished, so we wouldn't write Thomas Heiselberg, right? So I think that the historical novel is always a bridge from the time that the novel is being written to the historical period, and it accumulates all the time that passed. If it's an interesting novel, because if it's not relevant in any way to our time, I don't think it's worth to read it. And this is why, for example, novels about these extreme Nazis, these crazy people, are not interesting for me, because these people are vanished. They are not interesting to our time. This is only my perspective, right?
Could you elaborate a little bit on the story?
Well, it's a story about two people, one from Berlin and the other from St. Petersburg. The beginning of the novel describes their world, and this, in her case, something very bad happens to her family. Her parents are being arrested and all her friends. And in his case, he's losing his job in the American company, which was very important to him, because he was like a brilliant marketing researcher in the American company, a rising star, and then the company leaves Germany after the Crystal Night. So they both find themselves in a position that they need to reinvent themselves and decide what to do with their life. And then in this juncture, the book elaborates about the decision to cooperate with those regimes for different reasons. He wants to be a big man. He wants to investigate his talents. He's a very brave guy in the sense that he's willing to take many risks in order to fulfill his plans. And he's also not just ambitious, but also naive, because he believes in his plan. He's like a devoted believer in his own plans.
And he is anti-political.
He's non-political, which is a very interesting breed also in our time. And then the book explores the way that they cooperated with those regimes and what happens later. This is like the plot with all its twists and turns, etc. But this is like the beginning. The first part, the name is a preparation for a grand deed, which means the first part describes their collapse, but then after the collapse, when you think about your life, think about your career, and then you prepare for like a grand breakthrough upward in the social ladder and career rise. And the career point is a very important point in Good People, because usually in a lot of novels, writers talk about the family unit, the marriage as the important part of the human, life. But the career is also very important in the 20th century and in general, and sometimes authors tend to neglect this point of view. You don't know exactly what the protagonist is doing, where is he working exactly, how does he have so much money in order to contemplate his life all the time in the streets of San Francisco or Tel Aviv. But this is a book that really deals with people's career and the way they, understand their lives and their achievement and their characters in their life through their career, and how they explore their talents through the career. Not just being successful, it's like an investigation to understand the borders of your talents.
And career is an important thing, I guess, in collaboration.
Yes, but of course, but I think about it in this way, not just about the Second World War. We all have certain ethic, the things that we believe in. And sometimes if you're a very smart guy, you can elaborate and be very fluent about your ethic. But sometimes it's more instinctively, right? Things that you believe in. And then you go out to the world, and your ethic, personal ethic, encounter the ethics of institutions, corporations, states, government. And in this point, when those ethics bind together and try to surrender one another, because you need this institution in order to survive and to advance, something happened to your personal ethic. This is not just a question about the Second World War. It's I think, a very interesting question about capitalism, which is by nature more inclusive. Because capitalism basically say to you, okay, you criticize me, you don't like me, you're a socialist, you're a social democrat, but come work for me. In the evening you can write in Facebook that you don't like capitalism, but come work for me. Not like Nazism, who demands total devotion, right? This is why capitalism is more sophisticated. So I think that this juncture of this encounter between your personal ethic and the ethic of, as I said, institutions, corporations, states, government, ideology, is the most crucial point in Good People. And I think it's a very crucial question in our time.
And you, when I understood you well, you're using a metaphor. One of the characters talks about a huge production plant of denial in the human soul.
Yeah, I use the word like the elastic nature of the human soul, which is not something that I really believe, like the way that your consciousness or your ethic is very elastic, and it will always adapt. Because I think that
through the way of denial.
Through not just denial, by the way, also reasoning and reinventing the story and create another narratives, because our mind always work with calculations, right? We are like calculations machine. We are walking on the street and we say right or left, and then we calculate, but it's everything else. Our friends, we are calculating everything all the time. We think about actions, repercussions, another action, and this book, and it's very hard to describe in literature, this calculation machine. I think with Thomas, I try to do it, to show how his mind always calculates the next move and the next move and the next move. So I think that basically, in this sense, Good People really try like to investigate a certain place in the consciousness that is very hard to show in literature, because it's so chaotic and it's also working all the time. So you can write hundreds of pages just about one decision. But I think that these calculation machines, that I think all of us are calculation machines in different ways, is something very evident in Good People, especially in Thomas Eiselberg's case.
When I read the book, I thought maybe this book describes or investigates the psychology of collaboration?
Well, you know, if you want to isolate the collaboration question to the Second World War, then you can claim that research about the psychology of the collaborators is more interesting than novel. Now, I'm not a researcher, nor a historian. I think that what novels can add to this discourse about the Second World War in general, one of the things is to create new characters, like to inject new characters into the discourse. And if these characters are interesting and they have this refreshing point of view about the discourse, so you can create something new. So, and I have this one thing about characters that I really like, that I think that a good character is a rare and unique amalgamation of qualities. Because I can't invent new qualities, because we know the human qualities, but the certain specific amalgamation of a character, think about Gatsby or Scott Fitzgerald, or Ulrich of Robert Musil, sometimes the specific amalgamation can create a unique character, unique qualities. So this is what I try to do in Good People. And I think that, for example, Thomas Heiselberg, his perspective is pretty new perspective when you think about novels about the Second World War. This is not the typical Nazi at all. I don't think he's even a Nazi. I basically despise the Nazis. He doesn't like them. He doesn't like the Nazi ideology, and he has this sort of a cultural contempt that a lot of German bourgeois held for the Nazis, but they cooperated with them nonetheless.
What made you write the book? What made you do this investigation?
Well, you know, I live in Israel, so in Israel, I think as in Europe, the Second World War is a very important subject, and you learn about it all the time. Sometimes you can feel suffocated by the Israeli and Jewish discourse about the Second World War because it's not universal enough.
Suffocated, you say?
Yes, suffocated, because I felt suffocated because it's, instead of understanding the Second World War as a case for universal lessons about our world, it's very specific Jewish understanding. So
and what is specific in this Jewish understanding?
It shall not happen to us again. We learn the lesson. We will protect ourselves. We will be strong. We will have army. We will never.
Which can be understood, I think.
Yes, but without a universal point of view, there is no sense of all of this.
And so there's no development.
Yes, and this is why, for example, it was very funny when Israel, for example, cooperated with the apartheid in South Africa, because the cooperation was because we need to survive as an Israeli state, right? We need South Africa, assumably. I don't believe it, but this was the claim. But it clashes the more important conclusion that this thing of racial, profiling of people, and then, racism in general is what caused the Second World War and the Holocaust, and we didn't learn the universal lesson. So in a way, this book came from like a rebellion against the Jewish discourse about the Second World War in Israel. This is why, in a way, it was very new in Israel, because they changed the point of view. This is not a Holocaust book. This is not a book about the Holocaust at all. It's a book about the Second World War.
And it comes from rebellion, you say?
It comes from, I think so. It comes from this sense that, look, the Second World War is an event of such magnitude that 70 years is nothing to understand it. I think that you should think about the Second World War, or the Second World War, like something like, think about the collapse of the Roman Empire. Nobody understands the ramifications 70 years later. And the Second World War, because of all the reasons that we know, the Holocaust and the war and the new boundaries and everything that we learned about technology and the despair after the Second World War from technology and from the human mind and from literature and from culture, everything. So I think 70 years is nothing to understand the war. And this is just another attempt to understand it. And I think that in 100 years from now, there will be more interesting and more free attempt to understand, because we are still, in a way, we can't write freely about the Second World War. We can't do it. I tried.
Because there's this huge burden?
Because there is a huge burden, because think about literature. I didn't read in my lifetime any complex Nazi character in literature. And literature deals with complexity, right? It doesn't deal with black and white. It deals with complexity. But all the Nazi protagonists that I read, think about Mephisto of Klaus Mann and the Jonathan Littell and Age, and all these books and other books, always describe the Nazi protagonists in a certain point, certain light, right? Why do they do it? Because in a way, the evilness of the Nazis is so grand and so huge
and so obvious
that you can't write about complex Nazis. But there were some complex Nazis, and if we won't struggle this, we won't tackle this point of view, it will always be a mystery, the Second World War, like this fantasy and mystery about these creatures from outer space. But this is not the reason why 80 million Germans cooperated with the Nazi regimes. So I think that literature should be, in a way, more brave about it. And I was criticized in a way that people that read the book felt sympathy toward Thomas in some points. But I said that if you write a novel, and I didn't, by the way, I wanted to create this balance between sympathy and repulsion. But I'm saying that if you write about characters that you only despise and hate, it will never be a good book.
And you're only talking only about sympathy for the Nazi character. How about the woman?
I think that it's easier to sympathize with Sasha.
The other main character.
Yeah, because Sasha has reasons to cooperate, which are...
So when you have reasons, that's different.
Yes, but I don't believe in her reasons. I'm saying that sometimes the reader can believe to her story, that she did it in order to save her brothers. And then there is a reason that the reader can understand, right? Family, the family unit, brother, the fantasy about childhood. So with Thomas it's more complicated because he doesn't have any reason except of his own will to be a grand man and to explore his talents.
To be somebody.
But Sasha, the difference between Sasha and Thomas, that he's like celebrating his ambition, while she is more sophisticated and smarter and reflective. But she's ambitious.
She's an ambitious poet.
Not just poet. Think about
in the beginning of the book.
Yeah, but okay, that's right. And then she fails as a poet, right? And what's the next stage? The NKVD, the secret police, gives her an opportunity to excel, to be brilliant, to be the rising star of the NKVD, something she never had.
Which is the
NKVD. Yeah. It's like she becomes an editor.
The intelligence.
The secret police. She becomes like an editor of in the NKVD. It's like a position that I invented, but it's so basically Sasha and Thomas are not so different in this way. It's only that Sasha is more sophisticated when she's reasoning her decisions, but also with her, the NKVD is the first place in her life when she can become a star and people will appreciate her and she can see that she's really talented and can be someone. So I think it's if you read the novel and think about that Sasha has reasons and Thomas doesn't have any reasons, it's not a very good way to read the novel. I think it's more complex than this, and there's something else. The novel tells you the story through their perspective, but you don't have to believe them. Because literature always, the complexity of literature always happens in these gaps between the consciousness of the characters, the author, and the book. Okay, there is this gap between the author and the characters, between the novel and their perspective. And this gap, this gray area is where literature is happening, when the reader needs to read the book and all the time invent the story and think about the story that he takes out of all the details that he knows. And I think that in this book there is always a gap between their consciousness and the story that the book is telling you. And this, I think, gap is interesting in literature. I think in a lot of good books you can find these gaps, which doesn't mean that my book is good. I'm just saying that you have this gap.
You call this book an investigation. What did the investigation bring you? What did you learn?
Well,
or maybe conclude?
I didn't say it was just an investigation, but I was saying that it was a laboratory to think about I would say, the human condition, and especially about the question about the human ethic, which is also very interesting in the new thing that I'm writing.
Yeah.
So, about conclusions.
Yeah, or what came out.
I think that I don't have...
For you personally.
Yeah. I think that, in a way, the writing of the book just made everything more complicated.
More complicated?
More complicated.
Okay.
I don't believe in answers for this question, like answers that you read the book and said, okay, now I understand. The reasons for cooperating is A, B, C, D. The book, exactly by nature, and literature by nature, I think believes in multiple reasons for everything, that you can't reduce nothing to one explanation or one conclusion. And what the book does, I think, is giving the reader more and more explanations and stories and reasons, and you know, people are talking about denial and about ambitious and about naivete and about guilt and not about guilt. And I think that this is the more chaotic atmosphere of the book, that you don't have anything to hold. That you know, in a certain point of the book you held to guilt, but then 20 pages later you see that guilt is not the answer, and maybe it's ambitious, but 20 pages later you see that it's not exactly ambitious. There is this false narrative of ambitious, but there's something else, and then you believe that Thomas is only about ambitions, but then you see that he's really naive about his plans. He's like a believer, not in ideology, but in his own grand plans. So I think this is the complicated area. There's no conclusions.
And that's the lesson learned.
I think that I want to force the reader to think all the time. And I think the biggest thing I learned from this novel, because I'm just a reader now, right? And sometimes you can come to this interview and interpret the book better than me, because I'm blind to certain things in the book. I know what I wanted to do. I don't know what I did. And there is a difference. There is a difference between the way I see the book and the execution. I know this difference, and sometimes I'm held to my own plan about the book, but this is not what people see in the book, and I understand it. I'm a Roland Barthes kind of guy, that there is a text and that's it. So I think that, but what I learned is that I talk to people in Germany, in Norway, in Israel, Italy, and now Netherlands, and I didn't hear two people who interpret the book in the same way. And this is, I think, the biggest achievement of this book.
And it underlines your ideas about complexity.
Yeah, you live this, you read this book through your perspective, and through the thing that you know about yourself and about the Second World War, and through your character. And your characters aims to certain point of the book that you see and other people will not see. And this is the way that people read books. And I think that sometimes the problem with novels that they are closing the landscape. Instead of opening the landscape, they're closing it to certain psychological explanation to everything, right? There is this, I hate this idea about the trauma. There is this trauma, and then you can explain everything through the trauma. I think that this idea of trauma destroyed so many good novels, that there is a trauma, and then you can understand, go back to the trauma. And I don't like this psychology one-on-one in literature. I think that you should not, you can write psychological novels like Dostoevsky wrote, but he always left everything very open. It wasn't like, oh, he has HDD, he's autistic, he can talk. I don't like these ideas. I think that you should be very careful in order not to close the landscape.
When I read the book, I thought, I wondered, are you a political person?
Well, you can see in my website. Of course I am. I think, no, in my generation of authors, I'm considered to be very political. Yeah. And, but, you know, there's parts in me that I injected to Thomas Heiselberg, because I think that every character in your book, there are parts of you that you injected to him, something from you that connected to the character. And then you can give him 20 other correctives, but there has to be something. So it's like Sasha has this fantasy about family that doubtfully ever represent something that happened, this is something for me. And Thomas also comes from me, but from a certain side of me which is non-political. But I have a very political side. And
but you have a very non-political side.
I think so. Let's say it in this way. When I wrote Thomas, I understood that I have this side more than before, because I'm very political. I come from a political family. My father was from the Labour Party. My grandfather was a minister in the Labour Party. So I come from a family that you are talking about politics all the time, and you are thinking about the future of Israel when you are 12. Okay, but when I wrote Thomas, he came from me. So this is also some extension of me, of a certain struggle that is happening in my mind. Because sometimes I think about the future of Israel, and I'm very worried about it, and I want to do things in order to improve the situation. And sometimes I'm not. I'm in a different place. This is the human mind. You can't. It goes with opposite directions all the time. This is why there is chaos in your mind, right? Because there's no one direction. I envy people that has one direction, and really, but there are so many directions, and you are going in so many directions all the time that it's very. This is why I write, basically, in order to calm this chaos in my mind.
Okay. And when you don't want to be political, what are you then?
I can be a nihilist. I can be many things. I can be, for example, believing in this existence when it's only about books and literature, and I will sit in some place remote from Israel and just read. And
in an isolated corner of existence.
In this literature, when I write novels, for example, so every morning I enter the world of the novel, right? Every morning I'm staying there for 8 or 10 hours. This is like an isolated world. It doesn't hear anything from the outside. So sometimes I want to live in this atmosphere all the time. So there is struggle also in me, because sometimes I think about, so people devoted 40 years from their life to finish the occupation. It hasn't been finished yet. So they waste all this time and all this energy to eliminate racism and the occupation. Everything failed. Do I want to live in this way? But then most of the time I feel committed. But at a certain point that I say, what do you mean committed? We are here for 70 years. There's nothing very important about me and my life and my stance and even my literature. So maybe I should just try to explore my talents and to explore, my inner qualities. But this is a struggle, I think, at least for me. And when I'm talking about it with you, I can't be very accurate about it because, as I said, it's a struggle. But most of the time, I believe I have to believe that we can change Israel. But
you have to believe.
But sometimes I know it's not true. And this is I think the most problematic political side in my soul, that I have to believe, because this is the place I grew up, this is my community, this is my life is there, this is my language. So I have to believe that we can change Israel. But there are many times at nights when I think about it rationally and I know that it's unchangeable.
Can there be a bridge between literature and politics?
Jameson said it, Frederick Jameson, and I believe that it's true, that everything is political.
Everything?
Everything is political.
For you too?
For every man who is not totally naive. If you experience the 20th century and you believe that culture is not political, then you're an idiot.
So this is a political book too?
Every book is political.
But what makes it political?
For example, this book is very simple. It tackles ideologies, the three biggest ideologies of the 20th century: Nazism, fascism, communism, and capitalism. So this is the political aspect of the book. It tries to investigate a guy who is Nazi and capitalist and understand this non-political entity. But the book claims, I think, that there is no such thing as non-political entity. If you are living this world, and if you are part of this world, and if you are cooperated cooperate with anything that is going on outside, then you're political. Albert Speer, he was Hitler architect. He said, I'm not a political figure. I never cared about politics. I was an architect. I was an artist. What does it mean? And when you know and understand how different regimes use literature, use film, use art, you can't seriously claim that there is such thing as non-political literature. What I mean is that not every literature deals with politics. It's not the way. But when you publish something in a certain atmosphere, in a certain world, with a certain struggles, in a certain state, then these books, by its own, became part of a political discourse and a political zeitgeist. This is inevitable, even if you want to deny it.
And I imagine there could be political power in this book, for instance, in Israel.
Well, it depends how you read the book, because
there we are again.
Because there were people who told me, I had this friend. It was a really funny story. So he's working in the Israeli government for a specific minister, but he's from the left wing. His point of view is like mine. So he read all the book and was so impressed. And then I told him, my father asked me why you don't resign from the government. So he told me, what do you mean? I'm just professional. So he read all this book, but he didn't think about himself.
And he is a collaborator too.
Yes, he's a collaborator. I think that most of us are collaborators. But there were some people who read this book and thought about Israel. Like there were some people from Norway who read this book and thought about consulting firms in Norway and thought about Thomas as the consulting guy of our future, of our time. So I'm saying that there are many ways to read the book, and it really depends on your personal ethic. But I'm saying this is not a book with a lesson. This is not a book you try to teach. I don't write moral literature. I don't like moral literature. The literature that I like is sometimes cruel, like Dostoevsky, and like Celine, and like Musil. So I don't believe in moral literature. I'm just saying that this book asks you questions, not directly, but indirectly, and then you can do whatever you want with it.